Good morning, everybody. I have to say, before I start, there's a disclaimer here. I should add another one, which is that I've had about 2 hours sleep. So the coherence with which these slides were originally first created may not be matched by the coherence with their delivery. So hopefully you'll work with me in relation to that. I mean, I've put the key themes up there to start out. They're very much just words to check to. I'll probably talk around them a little bit. I mean, a couple of thank yous first. I want to thank all of you for coming along. And the few people I've talked to during the break there really emphasize the importance of getting all of the groups that we have here today together. Because the key to making this work, and we talked to one of the questions before the break was about success versus failure. The key to making this work, in my view, is all of the stakeholders collaborating. It's not going to be a smooth and easy journey. For those of us who are at the coalface, it is not a smooth and easy journey already. And for everybody who has to join it over the next 3 or 4 years, as we heard from Orla there before the break, it's not going to be easy for any of them either. But we are learning all the time, and we should be sharing experiences all the time. This is part of that. That's why we're very pleased to be able to be involved in it. But I would urge everybody to take what experience they have and share with everybody else. I want to specifically thank Orla for the speech she gave, but also all the work she has done, and indeed the rest of the team in Department of Enterprise in getting this legislation through. Ireland has been one of the first countries to get the legislation through, and then also to actually engage with parties, and then we are actually surfacing issues here ahead of everywhere else in Europe, because frankly we have reached out to our stakeholder base and asked them to engage with IAASA, but also with the department in relation to that. I also want to thank Orla, because she's getting out of this in 2 or 3 days' time, and this is very much her swan song, but she has done a huge amount of work over the past few years to get this over the line. So thank you, Orla. I wasn't here from the very start because I was still at the airport. So apologies if any of this is an overlap with some of the things that you've heard already. But you cannot underestimate the huge change that this is bringing. So from an accounting point of view, I see it as 2 huge changes. I mean, the first one is this sustainability reporting framework. So we're moving from a situation of 150 years or more of sort of corporate reporting and sort of statutory corporate reporting, and all the history and experience and learning and expertise and education and training that has gone to putting that into place. And then we're just trying to copy and paste that into something in about 18 months. And you cannot underestimate the huge systemic change that is going to bring. And then along with that, you have a mandatory assurance framework. So we're taking audit, which has been around since, about 1850, and again, beginning of the 20th century in terms of formal statutory requirements. And again, all the training and expertise and experience that we all, or many of us have with that, and we're going copy and paste into something entirely new, something that has been sort of tweaked a little bit to try and fit in with what is hoped by the European Commission to be achieved by CSRD. So it's not even a clean copy and paste. So again, that creates huge challenges for all of us, especially in year 1, as we try and figure out what all this means. So it is transformative. That brings all of the, if I can use the phraseology, it brings all the impacts and risks, but it also brings the opportunities. It does bring the chance for us to look at what we do as accountants, as educators, and look at how we can maybe re-envision that a little bit, and think about the message that we're giving to all of the stakeholders about what it means to be an accountant. There was a question actually before the break around why is this sitting in the finance function, or why are people? It's a great question. There's no actual reason why it should sit in the accounting and finance function. And the times I've reflected on it, where I've got to is, it's because that's where people trust that this is the best chance of working. Because if you look at and I'll talk a little bit about skill sets later on, there are certain skill sets that are going to be innate in terms of trying to make this thing work. And I would say people looked around probably for about 5 minutes, but they did look around and say, well, where can we house this? So this is actually going to, we can deal with the technical requirements, but also the strategic requirements and the communication requirements. And corporate reporting, finance function, whatever it is, did seem to be the best place for it to sit. That being said, that does introduce very significant challenges because they tend to be mature parts of the organization, and they deal with things like 3 lines of defense. They deal with very much structured reporting lines. I mean, any of you who've worked in sort of corporate reporting will know, even on a consolidated basis, you get your monthly reporting packs and you have people sitting on you, and structure, and accountants love that sort of stuff. Now you're going to be dealing with HR departments, you're going to be dealing with sales and marketing departments, you're going to be dealing with building maintenance departments in terms of sort of CO2 emissions and stuff like that. I mean, some of these people probably have a somewhat distant relationship with the rest of the organization and a very distant relationship with controls. I'm being somewhat provocative, but definitely not compared to sort of finance and corporate reporting, where we're all sitting there with the likes of IAASA or the Corporate Enforcement Authority or our professional bodies or external stakeholders, all looking at us to say, get this right. In terms of the role of IAASA, I mean, I see our role is trying to make this work, and again, that was one of the questions we had before the break. It is about ensuring that what comes out of this is high quality and that people trust it. And what I hope is that everybody here shares that aspiration, because this whole thing will fall over if the information can't be trusted. So I see all of us, all of you, educators, companies, auditors, professional bodies, but also us as regulators, as being on the same side in the journey that we're currently undertaking. So I'll go back to my caveat or the disclaimer at the start and say these are my personal views, and I'm expressing them hopefully with a view to informing all of you and hopefully informing the panel discussion we're going to have as well. So please take them in that way, and they're definitely not the formal views of IAASA as such. So if I look at where we're going to be going in the first instance with regulated entities and people are going to come in, I mean, there are short-term demands, there are medium-term demands, and there are long-term demands. And for all of the different stakeholders we have here, they are going to have different implications for you. I mean, if I talk about educators, just to take one example. So you're going to have people who are graduating right now who are going to come out maybe in September. And for an awful lot of them, this is where a huge amount of work is going to be done straight away, because this is where people are screaming for bodies to do something. So straight away, they're going to need that. And then in the medium term, you have people maybe who are in first year or second year right now, and you need to start thinking about, well, how do I right size and fit these people so that they will be able to go in and contribute from day one when they're joining, be it companies, be it audit firms, whomever, consultancy, going out on their own, because there'll be a huge amount of jobs in this. How do we right fit them for the work that is to come? And then, in the long term, you have people sitting there who are like my daughter, who's planning to do Leaving Cert in June, and you need to think about the entire remit of degrees, undergraduate courses, and master's courses that you're probably looking at the design of right now. And you need to think, well, hold on, these people are going to be coming out in 4 years' time. What's the world going to look like in 4 years' time for an accountant? What sort of skill sets will they need? And that's not just CSRD, and I'll talk about this later on, but I'm probably going to end up running over because I'm very tired. But that brings in technology, because you will not be able to address this without technology. So you're going to have first of all, the technical understanding piece. So everybody's going to have to get to grips with this very, very quickly. And Orla gave very much a whistle-stop tour, but there are, and I know there's members of the professional bodies here, you can do a 6-week course, you can do a 6-month course, just to get to grips with the terminology and the technical requirements, the dozen standards, the 1,100 data points, and then all of the complications around things like double materiality and impacts, risks, and opportunities, and all those sorts of things. And again, we are learning about that all of the time. Every time somebody sits down and looks at it, they find something new, especially if they're looking at it in the context of work they're doing right now. Because it's one thing to look at this stuff, as many of us have for the last 2 years, go, oh yeah, I wonder what that means, I wonder what that means. It's a completely different thing when you're sitting there and you have a day job which requires you to do something in business or in an audit firm. And now you're looking at this going, what the hell does this actually mean? Because this is how I'm supposed to work it. And my own view is technology is going to be impossible without technology to make this work. There are so many different moving parts. I mean, how do you do a materiality assessment? How do accountants and auditors do materiality assessment? Apologies to the video. It's a percentage thing for the most part. At least that's what we start with. How do you do a percentage of a governance target? You know, how do you compare a percentage of, you know, the financial impact of a particular sort of business plan that you have from an ESRS point of view, and its CO2 impact? I mean, how do you compare those numbers? So technology will play a part in creating, I think, a platform to allow those sorts of comparators to take place and to help you with your double materiality assessment. And things like, I think, AI, in particular, and generative AI, because the technology is moving at such a pace, I think these are all going to arrive at pretty much the same time. I would say, as businesses and auditors and regulators look for something in the storm that we're all going to be in over the next few years, we will look to technology and we will look to AI and generative AI to say, give us a hand with this, to try and figure out what the parameters are and how we carry out this work. And the other point, and again, Orla alluded to this, I'm going to keep referring to Orla because she's the one speech I heard, but perhaps Ian did too, is that this isn't standing still. You know, the change is happening all of the time. No sooner have we stopped something than IFRAG are looking at sector-specific standards, they're looking at SME standards, we're looking at moving from limited assurance to reasonable assurance in terms of the opinion that the assurance service provider is going to give. So all of this is going to change all of the time. And again, what does that mean as educators? What does that mean in terms of you designing a course right now that will start in 2 years' time, that will produce graduates 4 years after that? That is not my problem. Just then maybe specifically around Wave 2 companies, because I think Wave 1, we've worked very closely with that small group of Wave 1 companies, so that the very largest companies and the very largest audit firms. And the latest news, though maybe Glenn Gillard might differ, is broadly speaking, we'll find a way. You know, there's a lot of resources there with the largest audit firms and the largest companies to get this through. Wave 2 is thousands of companies and hundreds of audit firms, many of whom have not even started looking at this, or have looked at it, put it away, and started doing other work because they're just afraid of how to get around this. It's that difficult. And I have nothing but sympathy for them. So that's thousands of companies. After that, then, you're going to have SMEs coming in some instances, whether they like it or not. So you have the listed SMEs, and I know that's a very small population here, but it's not in other jurisdictions. But then you will have SMEs who may want to volunteer to come in because the standards are in, and then you'll have the whole thing about value chain, which is, I think, about 3 years, or there's sort of a way for them to come in. But you'd be naive to think that those entities can wait 3 years, because if you are, so we've talked to some of the very largest corporates, they're already looking at their value chains and going, can we use your information? Because we're going to have to report it. So there is a huge risk here of a massive consolidation in value chains. And if you look at that compared to, say, the Irish government policy is about using the very largest corporates and using them to sort of grow SMEs in these, you know, fantastic areas where Ireland has developed specialist expertise, you know, historically pharmaceutical and digital. And I think AI and CSRD is another one. But you'll need to be able to report stuff into these large companies who will be reporting on. Otherwise, you're just going to be scoped out of the whole thing. So moving on then, sorry, I'm going to keep an eye and see where I am in time. Yes, thank you. In terms for auditors then, again, the largest auditors are going to find a way to do this because they're very much in their business interests and it's also a business opportunity. But there are a lot of requirements that are going to come in for auditors in the law, CPD requirements. There will also be a whole wave of ethical requirements, you know, again, that are going to parallel audit. But that really sort of, if you look at where those ethical requirements bring you, they scope you out of doing a lot of other sorts of work in this area, which is going to be a bonanza. So auditors are going to have to start making very important decisions about the future of their business. Do they want to be in this space? Because they can get out of this space, which means they might have to get out of the audit space, because maybe some of their clients won't want to pay 2 people to do 2 different sorts of audit. So you could have, from IAASA's point of view, it's something we're thinking about. Will there be many, many less statutory auditors in 3 or 4 or 5 years' time as individual sort of small and medium-sized practitioners decide this is not for them? Just in relation then to the education challenges. So the additional educational requirements have been set out, in company law that have come from the European Commission and Parliament. So what I would say is don't blame us, but we do know they're there. And they sit on top of all of the other education requirements that are there in terms of statutory audit. And nobody is going to be able to do this on their own. I mean, there is now a huge amount there. You cannot expect firms to train their staff into be able to doing all this. You can't expect accountancy bodies to be able to provide that additional education to get them to qualify in all of this on their own. And you certainly can't expect educators and people working in academic institutions to be able to prepare people for all of this. In fact, this might well be that tipping point that a few of us have talked about, whereby can you prepare every professional to be able to do everything as soon as they get qualified? Is that something that we can sustain anymore? There is the core skill of accountancy that the vast majority of auditors do. Then there's the skill of audit, which they're all trained to do, apart from maybe the practical experience. And then we're also going to talk about the skill of sustainability assurance, which sits there as well. I mean, the pot is only so big. So I think there are important decisions here for educators and for accountancy bodies and for firms and for regulators to think about in terms of what the future structure of a professional, of an accountant, is going to look like. So looking into the future then, again, heard already about international developments. This isn't happening in a vacuum. You do have international sustainability standards. Again, in Washington yesterday, hearing about the SEC and then lawsuits relating to the SEC. So they don't hold any, and of course, an election. So there may be no sustainability in Washington after next week. But there is a momentum behind this. I mean, if I was to be provocative, which I was yesterday evening after the event, so you have ISRS standards being prepared by the IFRS Foundation, but you have ESRS, which are like miles ahead now. All right? But everybody wants alignment. So why aren't the ISRS or the IFRS Foundation tasked with continuing to develop ESRS? Because that's really the body that's historically developed standards. The pump has been primed now by EFRAG and the European Commission. They have this fantastic suite. So let them do that. I've talked also about technology, so I won't labor that point again, but I think technology is going to be absolutely key and critical to getting this over the line and making it work. And again, we're lucky that in wave one, it's the largest companies and the largest corporates, so they have the opportunity to lead here in terms of figuring out how that will work. What does that mean then in terms of professional skill sets? Because AI and technology is going to move professionals up their value chain. All of that sort of totting and checking and stuff. One of the questions I was asked when I was on a panel yesterday was, how are auditors going to learn to audit if they're not going to be doing all this menial work anymore? And my response was, what are they learning doing menial work? They're learning how to fill in numbers on a spreadsheet or, check responses to emails. Imagine if the technology did all of that, and on day one, the day they start in their audit firm, they're exercising professional judgment. Within guardrails and properly supervised and managed. They're actually learning to be auditors right from the very start. That's actually creating better professionals than, getting there in 2 or 3 years' time and eventually exercising professional judgment maybe in year 3. So what are those skills? I think those skills, and I've thrown some buzzwords up there, it is going to be about synthesizing all sorts of different sorts of data and assessing it, applying professional judgment to it, mediating between what are at the moment completely different sets of data and trying to figure out, what does this mean in terms of what we're trying to report, and then communicating it in a way to people who might be either ignorant or skeptical or both, and explaining what this means and why it's important. My very final point is that this is an opportunity to look at what it means to be an accountant. So if you think about how we make the profession more attractive, a lot of people talk about, well, what is the meaning behind this? There are other professions where you work just as hard as accountancy, but we don't hear about the challenge around attracting lawyers or attracting doctors. And I suspect part of that is because those people feel there's an innate value in what they do. Well, here is an opportunity to talk about the innate value that accountants bring in terms of sustainability and the future of this planet depend on trustworthy data collected, assimilated, and reported. That is what they do. You add to that cutting-edge technology, which is going to be an inevitable part of making this work. And that is a compelling vision in my view. And it's up to everybody here in this room to properly communicate that vision to all of the people who are looking at this. And that starts before the firms, it starts before the bodies, it starts before third level. It starts with my daughter, who is not doing accounting for the Leaving Cert because she just couldn't see the value of it and didn't want to do a career in it. So that's where we need to be looking in terms of communicating this compelling vision. But I do think it's there, and it's up to all of you to try and communicate it better. So apologies for that, overran, but thank you.